Welcome back. We are on AMP. I'm India Weeks. This is James Burns, and we are here today with Kylie Batlin.
Hi.
And Kylie is looking fabulous today.
Oh, I look fabulous today. Why are we looking fabulous today? It is officially Pride Month for Pacific Grove. They're raising their flag today. It's June 1st at 12 o'clock. Thank you so much to Kim Bowie Burton for all of her work that she has done as Monterey County's head librarian and head historian, truly making history with this mark of the flag today and raising the flag over City Hall. So, change does come.
Exciting.
Yay flags.
Yay flags.
And also Monterey has a Pride Parade and a big festival down at the Custom House Plaza. But is that in June?
In July.
In July.
It's in July,
Yes.
okay.
Mid-July.
So Pride keeps going.
Yeah, we're prideful, we're proud.
And that's where we met you.
Yeah, that is.
That'll be our
that's so
1 year.
funny because I think I was actually wearing this dress. This is the Pride dress. I actually got this at a thrift store in San Francisco, and I do remember that's why I met you guys because I had my nieces with me. I wanted to show them some inclusive spaces. Having outlets where people can actually have events that are successful and inclusive. So that's, especially important for the young people. And I'm talking, ages, 8 to 15, people who are really starting to develop their own style and question the world around them and change their own inner dialogues and start to think critically for themselves about what they want to do in the world and who they are, who they're looking to become. So this is part of the movement of helping individuals shape themselves and shape one another. So
Awesome. And before the break, Jimmy was talking about how religions break down when they no longer reflect the values of the current generation. And I think Pride is one of these, is a not completely new, but newish compared to, like, say, the Bible. Pride is a new festival. It's a new celebration.
I would say that it's older than the Bible, and the Bible just erased it for a long time.
Ooh, yes.
So truly,
Good point.
because we've talked a lot about history, and we've talked about the rewriting of history, and I think it is easier to see in Indigenous communities where the history is orally passed down a lot of the times. So it's kind of easier to disrupt and discredit some of the experiences of peoples on Earth that weren't just written down into doctrine. So we've always had a history of people who were two-spirited. We've had language in many different cultures around the world for this experience of not having a binary, for this experience of being human. And the twist on humanity that has happened now is to try and clearly define what it is to be a man, what it is to be a woman, and to put you into these strict experiences and how you move through the world, which I don't think was something that had previously happened. People were born and they were themselves, and then they moved as themselves through the world, and we related to them as we would any other living being with a soul. We are spiritual beings in a physical body having a physical experience. And we didn't, I don't think, really start to externalize these ideas of like caste systems and who gets treated better, why, versus, or clearly based on what you look like or how you feel, which is a really interesting experience. I think right before the break, we were talking about tie-dye movement and the break in toxic masculinity. Maybe we could also include that in this last half segment, because even the idea that queerness and that pride is something new when it's ancient. Human beings have always existed as human beings on a spectrum.
There's a great new documentary about two-spirited shamans in Mexico, and that is an ancient, probably pre-Hispanic tradition that is still going today, and it followed a two-spirit shaman who was doing a funeral and a ceremony for somebody who was very popular in the community who had passed away, and it was really, really a beautiful story, and you got the feeling that it was timeless. was, yeah.
Yeah, when I was growing up, I always thought of everybody as just a brain floating in a body. And I really believe in human first, gender second.
Yes, spaghetti monster religion.
Mm-hmm. And, you know, I met a genius 10 years ago or so. I had the fortune he was a songwriter for a band called Express Yourself Clearly, and they were very big. They opened for Madonna. They opened for who else? They went around the world for everybody. And he
Whitney
was
Houston. He opened for Whitney
Whitney
Houston,
Houston,
Boys to Men.
Boys to Men. Yeah, he was amazing. His name was Damon Butler. He's still here. So he went by a stage name of Limp Wristed. And he said,
I love it.
And the lyrics were Limp Wristed, don't get it twisted, I'll cut you. And
Have you seen that on television?
Beep. No, I'll
But-
cut you. Beep. I'll be in charge of beeping. from now on.
Right?
But he was
Censor
so
us.
incredible a person and just so lovely, and everything he expressed was love. And we brought him back home and had him stay with us 2 weeks with our daughter, who is a songwriter, and just saw his process. And his brain was just incredible. And I think it was because he was tapped in to not the cast. He was castless, you know?
Mhm.
And I don't know. He just wrote the greatest things, and it was again
Really inspiring lyrics and inspiring melodies. He was just an amazing genius. And so he was our daughter's first musical mentor. And
I love that.
yeah, and actually her first gig, I think she was 11,
the
was
Palmer Room
was at a gay bar in North Hollywood.
when she was 11.
Mhm.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
I forgot about that.
See, look, molding the children to be leaders of the future, we
Mhm.
need more gay bars that will allow children to showcase their talents.
And
Exactly.
whenever she was asked her gender, she always said, and this was way before everything, she always said she was gender casual.
I love it. I today I'll be gender informal. It's my gender informal wear.
Gender casual.
I love a
Mhm.
top hat and I love ties. I love a strong femme suit. It's
Well, she put
I
a
live.
feather from her favorite rooster that we had, Jerry.
Aw.
So we had this rooster, and we had 2 roosters, but we didn't know it. We thought we had 1 rooster, and this one rooster was rapacious, and we called him Rap. And he was mean. He was like jump on the hens and was just violent
Pulling
and
out the
mean.
feathers and
And-
yeah.
Toxic masculinity.
It was
at
really
its
a toxic,
finest.
yes.
So, you know, we were raising chickens, and at that time we weren't eating our chickens. We were just getting their eggs. So we actually took Rap for a ride, and then we just threw him out in an empty field and just said, Rap, you're on your own because he's so mean. And what happened was the next day, one of the hens, that was Maya's favorite hen that was named
Sherry.
Sherry, came out and
She-
crowed. And it was a rooster who was hiding in the hen house.
So Sherry would sit on the eggs,
right.
just like, and so as soon as the really violent
Rooster
rooster
was
was gone, Sherry jumped off the egg box and just went
and became Jerry. And he was the most gentle rooster we ever had. And Maya made, our daughter made all these YouTube videos with her and her rooster.
She
and
made an
so-
entire YouTube channel of just her and her rooster, pet
and
rooster.
I
unfortunately,
love that. That is so special.
so Sherry became Jerry.
yeah.
And
That was our gender fluid rooster.
Yeah.
Mhm.
yeah, and then an accident happened, and dogs killed our chickens, and so Maya was able to salvage a few of
Tail
Jerry's
feathers.
tail feathers, and so in her top hat she wore her rooster feathers. Crowd
I wish
pleaser.
I had that childhood. What an amazing experience. I too wish to live with the gender fluid roosters.
Ooh,
I love your dress.
Oh, thank you.
You look fabulous and very prideful.
But you can go online to YouTube and look up Maya Ipala, and they have videos that they did from when they were 8 to 12 years old. And what I did for Maya was I got her a camera with a chip, and I said, you know, instead of watching TV, why don't you make TV?
Go make it.
And so,
Mhm.
and I showed her how to use the editing equipment on her laptop. And so her and her friends all day would just make videos. And it initially started off with, 30 minutes of just crazed dancing.
And
And
screaming.
right. And then it slowly
Oh, it
became,
evolved into like voiceovers of animals, and they did involved plots with all the animals in the neighborhood, and then
they
they would.
made costumes. And
Mm-hmm.
I love that. It reminds me because my grandfather was a state park ranger on my mother's side, and my mom would tell me all of these stories because they would just be at the state parks and they're up in the cabins, and she would tell stories of how she and her sisters would play dress up, and they had the old school camcorders, and they would take the cardboard and make a little TV
hmm
box and have their own news shows and all of these things that we still do today, but now we have the technology and the attention span is a lot shorter, and we have all of the editing and the filters at our fingertips. So it's like that's old school TikTok.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
now it's like you get with your friends and you do your TikTok dances and you create them. I think the only real difference between then and now is that idea of like you needed people to do that with the
Mm.
collaboration aspect versus, as we've kind of touched on, um, the loss of a more communal mindset, or that the communal mindset is digital and you still are an individual creating that content without that type of interaction. So, getting back to creating
Mm-hmm.
that unity and community.
Well, I'm curious what you think about media literacy, because before the break we talked a lot about media literacy and what it is and the curriculums that are available. How do you feel about now the fact that most children are producing digital video content? Like,
product, yeah.
how do you feel about that? Do you feel like this maybe millennials to Gen Z are more media literate because they're creating content?
I think there is a conflict. Um, and it's like, oh, the one generation like chasing another. So I think there's a lot that children have access to where the parents don't realize how much they have access to. When it comes to creating content, it's one thing. When it comes to just being able to access and view content, it's a whole nother thing. There's
Mm-hmm.
not like oh, this is the child version of TikTok. There's not
Mm.
like here's for a targeted youth group internet. Like we don't really have um, a way to oversee that yet. Certain nations have kind of implemented some things in terms of regulation where everybody's on board. I do
Mhm.
think you're going to have in whatever community, you're going to have the people who like to work better as a group, and you're going to have the people that like to work better alone. I think that's just a human nature.
Mhm.
I
Mhm.
don't know if it's really changed just because we have the technology. I think it just kind of showcases um, people's propensity to isolate. And if you eliminate the spaces that we used to be communal in, because we had talked about, a lot of people now being educated and looking at history of churches and looking at the history of doctrines and,
Mhm.
saying, I don't like how that feels. I want to step away from that. I don't want to be associated with that, and leaving behind all the civil equipment. Right. And then talking about pride and the
Mhm.
square and having spaces where people can feel comfortable to join in. So I think that a lot of the TikTok and a lot of the wanting to create something that is viral is a call for um, community, and it is a call for attraction for one another, to be like, oh, I have this thing that is a common language that we both can talk about, and it's
Mhm.
an activity
Mhm.
that we all can do. So I think probably bringing back more like a group projects and being able to make films and make your own content in nature and get with your friends and have the education, having the programs for that. So funding art programs, funding
Mhm.
outreach
hmm
programs,
Mhm.
having spaces like AMP where people can come and gather and actually do shows and do them at a higher production level. And I feel like when you start to see um, your inner world and your inner dialogue reflected,
Mhm.
is when you're going to want to engage more and more. Yeah.
Yeah. I wonder if the kids in Gen Z, um, I imagine they are consuming less corporate content because they're consuming maybe more amateur content of their own and their friends created, And then the other, I hope, I mean, that's kind of my wish. And then my other wish is that maybe in creating content, they realize maybe they're more critical viewers when they do view corporate content.
So I think about music spaces a lot because those are the spaces that I'm in, and
Hmm.
I can definitely say with everyone having access to be able to make their own beats and record their own music, people are more critical of what is mainstream
Hmm.
because they're like, why is this, being pushed, whereas this one artist has incredible lyrics, has the production value, they're indie. Um, and then you have to think, okay, to Jim's point, we had talked about ads and revenue and the polish and an agenda that's being pushed. So I do think there's a lot more actual media literacy in this generation
Hmm.
because we can produce more. So it's like, oh, if I can do everything that I would want to get out of a company for myself and still have my independence as an artist and not have my image owned in perpetuity for whatever that
Hmm.
means, and actually find ways to get paid for my streams and find ways to pick and choose which ads I do want to be,
Hmm.
included if I have to, because that I feel like is another like strong arm of the industry, which is like, okay, things that you're told that you need to do in order to make it, which is for women a lot of times it's like be sexual,
Hmm.
um, and I think for men a lot of times it's be aggressive, and then we have this kind of dumbing down right with pop of being okay, well be able to be consumable, be able to be played on television for ads, be able to be played on radio, be kind of less regional. Don't be regional. Be a standard.
Hmm.
So if you can standardize, even though we're like, it's kind of like what has happened to the artist. I look at Prince and his trajectory, and all of the things that he had said with all of his art. Talking about what it means to be a slave to the industry, talking
Hmm.
about what it means to be a true creator and an original, versus someone who is uh, like a tool or a cog piece that just lets the, whatever label is pushing them, lets them dictate what their image is, what their lyrics are going to be. Pink has spoken out about it. If you
Hmm.
listen to a lot of Pink's records, the type of music that she wanted to create, the type of music that she's known for now, and the level of artistry that she's known for now, she would not have been able to put that out at the beginning of her career. Same with
Hmm.
artists like, Christina Aguilera, where I think it's also you get the like the Disney kid syndrome where you're placed into a box of entertainment for children, and then you
Hmm.
have to fight for your identity as an adult. And a lot of the times we see this swing from we are pure innocent to I want to be seen as a full adult, so I'm going to swing to the sexy spectrum.
The Montana
Yeah, yeah,
spectrum.
the Hannah Montanas, my tongue's out, I've got my breasts out, look at my butt. Like we're rebelling and we're gonna do all the things that adults do, which is funny because the immediate things in the United States, at least, is like drinking and smoking, which it's not the same all around the world, guys. People do not
Hmm.
equate being an adult with being able to drink and smoke. Like that's just not what makes you a grown up in other
Hmm.
countries and other
Hmm.
nations.
The
So the
ability to acquire cancer.
right. Ha 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 ha.
Adulthood.
Adulthood. Bills. Bills, bills, bills. Yeah, even bills is not what makes you an adult in a lot of other nations. So
Hmm.
yeah, we gotta think always through the frame of we are living in a very like capitalist society. Meh.
You were talking earlier about East versus West, and I
Mm-hmm.
was thinking there's also collectivist culture
Mm-hmm.
as opposed to the individualized. And really, I don't think there is any real individualistic culture besides maybe the Western
I
world.
like colonial versus decolonializing
Mm.
what you think your communal living is or how you
Mm-hmm.
even think life should be, down to the fact of like, do you need 3 meals a day or should you eat when you're hungry? What how is the food pyramid actually affecting you? Who decides what is qualified as what in that pyramid? Down to being able to read and understand labels because it's I think of like what are things that are implemented system wise that keep people busy in their mind so that they're not allocating thoughts and resources to doing things like being media literate and
Mhm.
being
Mhm.
I take that I had talked about like, oh, this is like psychology and broadening it beyond what we consume into like all of our daily aspects, how we live, which I think also ties into religion because religion dictates how you live. So if you are spending your time so worried about calorie counting, how much mental energy are you putting forth into deciding what your meal plan is going to look like, when you can
Mhm.
eat,
Mhm.
how much you're
Hmm.
eating, what types of foods, which, this is part of like living. We are organic beings and we have to
Mhm.
stay alive. But we have constructed things in such a way where you actually have to be extremely mindful about the products that you're purchasing because we put poison in our food. And
Mhm.
we decided that, oh, well, we have this government body that's supposed to regulate. But when you look at the regulations and the percentages of things that are allowed, things that are not technically food, it's like
Mhm.
when you start nitpicking into what the definitions of things are, when you're picking up cheese and it's not actually cheese. They're like, this is
Mhm.
a dairy product. You're like, is it? What is this?
But why is it mostly vegetable oil?
Why is it
Yeah.
mostly vegetable oil? And learning about the chemistry. So I consider myself very blessed to have the background that I have had and the education that I have had when it comes to biology and when it comes to chemistry, when it comes to anatomy, when it comes to science and religion, because I feel that they do go together. Human beings trying to process and understand their environments and to live, finding out what are poisonous things, what plants help us, how do we relate to nature, and unfortunately, you see people talk about big pharma a lot, and that is a twist on the relationship that human beings naturally had with the earth. All of these pharmaceuticals, they come from something. We had
Mhm.
to be able to derive something. And so if this is the derivative, well, what's the source? And why can't I just take the source, which comes with all of the benefits and probably like none of the
The
punishments,
side
the
effects.
side effects.
Mhm.
I talked a
Mhm.
lot about like aspirin and like the beneficial portions of aspirin, and then what actually makes it harmful for your stomach, what makes it harmful for your kidneys and your liver to process. And did you know that
Mhm.
if you take the original plant and like make your tea, that you don't have to worry about those things?
Hmm.
We the original doctors, and the witch hunt, which was like just educated people. It was just educated people who
Mhm.
knew how to
Mhm.
use natural resources um, in
Can't
terms of
have
power.
that.
Can't have that. I was like, this is why it's off topic because you gave Kylie a question and she ran with
And
it.
she's on aspirin
She's
now.
on that. No, we're not on aspirin. It's
Very good. You're on
very good.
willow bark.
We're
Yeah,
on
but
Willow Bark.
Jimmy, we have friends that are doctors, and they
Hmm.
said that aspirin, Advil, Tylenol, if they were to try to get FDA approval today, would
Uh
not
huh.
get it because they are so hard on the liver and the kidneys, and they kill a certain amount. A certain amount of people die every year, ODing
Yeah.
on these over-the-counter painkillers. But
They're
just because
not
they
legal in other
Insane.
countries.
and many of them aren't. You know, Visine isn't legal in Mexico because they feel it's completely toxic to the eye. And I don't know the history or why, but and also some antihistamines are illegal in Mexico as well. And
Well,
also they don't give any opioids for any reason.
I
Like you
think
don't get
a
opioids.
lot of things that we use for medications are not actually treating root causes, like
Mhm.
the Visine, right? They're like, oh, it cures redness. I'm like, does it actually cure the redness, or does it just make your eyes reflect like white in a different way so they look whiter, but the
Mhm.
underlying cause for the redness is still there? So I think a lot of our medications is just like makeup. Like, all of your
Mhm.
wrinkles and all of your sickness, everything is still there, but the symptoms are masked now. So at least you can look like you're functioning well, which, blech, who likes that? Let's rip down the veneer. I think that is
Very good.
we're just ripping off the veneer of things.
I say it's profit-driven lapses of judgment.
Yes. Pay me to not pay attention.
Hmm.
I believe that there's some regulation stuff going on with water right now. That there's been some rollback of regulations on water safety in the U.S. I don't know all the specifics, but that's like headlines that are
I
just coming
think
out.
we can clearly say, like, Flint still doesn't have clean water. Flint still doesn't have clean water. It's been years. Flint still doesn't have drinkable water. And I think that should tell you everything that you need to know about how things are going in the United States. Other
Mm-hmm.
nations have talked about the poverty here because we also skew our metrics. It's a funny thing
Mm.
of playing with statistics and standardizations for things when it comes to educating the public. Everybody here grows up believing that we are the cream of the crop, that we have the best education, that we are functioning the best, that our so very young nation, country, empire is functioning at the pinnacle. We're at the top of the food chain,
Or the object of envy.
or the object of envy, and then you go everywhere else and they're like, Americans don't have real food, they don't have real healthcare, they don't have real education. Half the population only speaks one language, which is unheard of around the world. And
Our food is not safe.
our food is not safe.
Our water is not
You
safe.
can't drink it.
Yeah.
We have police that will kill indiscriminately without measure. Our justice system is a joke. Our court system is a joke. Our
The
governmental
world,
policies are trash.
right? And the world did not know that 20 years ago because we went around and you talk globally to anybody and they believed what they saw on TV. They're just like, oh my gosh, there's a guy who's a garbage man and he owns a mansion, and you're like, yeah, on TV, but not in real life. And then you go, oh, this is blah, blah, blah. And they'd say, well, America's the greatest country on the planet. We went around and we'd say, no, this was during the George W. Bush era. And we're like, no, America has these problems, and people would not believe us. And that it bothers me that people believe the TV more than they believe people.
Individuals.
Oral histories.
I've noticed
Yeah.
that TV undermines the authority of everybody but itself.
Well, you have this idea of a picture being 1,000 words, and if it is 1,000 worlds,
Yes.
and if you can see it, you can believe it.
Mhm.
Your brain doesn't know how to process, I think.
But it's an illusion.
It's an illusion. We
It's
try to
constructed.
intellectualize that we can really tell the difference between what is real and what is not real.
But we cry at movies.
But we cry at movies, and we
Yeah.
get attached to characters. And when story writers write out your favorite person on the show, they get angry letters, they get death threats. That is real.
Well, and representation it is amazing when you watch TV and you see someone you feel represents who you are in society, then you become very sensitive to what words come out of their mouth, how they're treated by the people around them. And that's an interesting thing is that when you start recognizing the representation of all the characters and what groups that they do, you become much more aware rather than, oh, that guy looks like me, or look, that guy's wearing a tie-dye, or he's a skater. How are they going to portray the skater? Oh, the skater saves the storyline. Oh, my group got represented as a hero, or my group got represented as a villain, and you really do take it personally. And it's important to recognize the representation of all the groups and not just who you are. Like an old woman would be like, oh, the woman next door is an old woman. She makes milk and cookies for the kids on the block. Oh, that's like me. Or no, it's an old woman and she is crotchety and she's complaining about everybody.
And she's the
she's
villain.
racist.
She's
and
the
you're
villain
like,
in the story.
right, and you're
Yeah.
like, that's not me. Our daughter watched Get Out and said it was the first time she looked in the mirror and saw herself as a young white woman as scary. Like she thought, oh my God, I'm the most frightening thing on the planet because she'd just seen the movie Get Out. And she said,
She looked in the mirror and scared herself.
Ah!
But the thought crossed her mind, and that was because it was represented in a movie that way. And it was really neat to see Jordan Peele do these amazing movies. I mean, we were huge fans of Key and Peele, and one of their last episodes was how much would you be willing to take to sell out? And it was a funny conversation. And then the next time he showed up was on a show called Pieces. What was that?
Life in Pieces. It was
Life in
and
Pieces?
the next time he showed up, he was in the show called Life in Pieces, and he was the most degraded character you'd ever seen. Jordan Peele. That's what he did right before he started making movies. So,
But he got the money, and then he took over the Twilight Zone. He took over. I mean,
which
he
is
put
excellent, by
Get
the way.
Out. What was that other one? The Golden Country. What was that? It was the greatest series that got canceled.
Oh yeah, Lovecraft Country. That is
Lovecraft.
so good.
That was incredible. Have you seen that one?
It's on my watch list.
Yes,
So
it's amazing, but it's scary.
Scary. I love amazing and I love scary. I love supernatural.
He took a bigoted science fiction writer from like the 1930s and 40s, and he flipped it. And it's with all African American heroes and stuff. It's really, and the guy would be rolling over in his grave. That's the fun thing to know.
That's the fun.
But he bought the rights and he rewrote it. He recast it, and it's just really.
Well, talking about
amazing.
representation, we had always been really, being media activists, we had been really clued in on violence against women, and there's a lot of great documentaries that go over the history of violence against women in media and in ads and that kind of things. There's a movie called Killing Us Softly, which is just a Gene Kilborn's film, which is timeless. But I was talking about this with friends of ours who are a lesbian couple, and they said, well, do you notice how lesbians always die the most horrible death in every movie?
Yes.
And I was like, oh, no.
I
had not
and here I was literate.
I had not been sensitized to that issue. And so then as soon as she said it, we couldn't unsee it.
And you see it everywhere. And isn't that, I would say, the root fear for Americans is that the veneer, the Norman Rockwell vision of what it is to have the American pie and the football and the land of opportunities, that veneer is ripped away. And it's not that you can't have those opportunities, but it is just a recognition that there is a whole picture and not this tiny slice. And seeing that our civic duties are not done, our government can be worked on and should be worked on. It's a continuous effort. There's things that have just gone by the wayside where people have been distracted and it's not functionable. And we see it now with the fact that we don't have the birth rate to continue our population. And then we see all of this legislature that is going into play to force people to have children, whether they can support them or not. But it's like, you'll put the legislation in place to force the birthing, but you won't put the legislation in place to support your citizens who are already here. I look at also like our aging population. My mom is looking at retiring, but she won't be able to. They're talking about like pushing retirement, and they're talking about, well, what happens with your money after you pass? And you're not going to be able to pass on wealth the same way that you would have. You're not going to be able to retire at an age that will allow you to actually enjoy your retirement. People are talking about having to work until they're 70 now, which by that time...
I see people working till they're 70.
I do see people working until they're 70.
Yeah.
And
but getting back to media too, is that, the representation of someone who's working at 70 is that, do they bring up the issues that are real about working at 70? Or they're like, do you see them on TV and they're like, I never want to retire, work is my life. And you know what I mean? It's all in the portrayal of it.
It's minstralism. It's modern day minstralism.
Right. Because we know another man whose name is Steve Binder, and he was a director of a lot of famous things. But one of them was he was
a rock and roll director of rock and roll films.
I love it.
Yes.
He did the first interracial touch in 1968 between
Harry Belafonte and Petula Clark.
And what happened was
known in TV history as The Touch.
And so what happened was Chrysler was the sponsor of the show, and they wanted it taken out. And he actually had to go down the studio and destroy every camera angle where they could erase it. And so he made sure it went through, and everybody said, oh, you're going to lose your job forever. And then he ended up getting, right after that, the Elvis comeback special. So in the Elvis movie, he's the hero.
He did all right.
Yeah, he did all right. And showed about Elvis's racial sensitivities. So, there's these media things, and you're just like, there's the first interracial kiss. And I mean, these things were big moments when they happened. When we were watching TV, Ellen DeGeneres had a show and she came out as gay. I mean, these were.
And that was way too recent.
Right. That was in the late 90s.
Mhm.
And so there's a book I found online called Sit Commentary instead of sitcom, but Sit Commentary. And it was like shows that had addressed major issues for the first time in comedy. But
Well,
And
I
that's how
also
people
love
learn.
that title of like major issues because I feel like there probably was a time where that wasn't the major issue. The major issues were how do you feed your population? How do you, bring people together? And I feel like the individual expressions and push for respect as human beings only came after a severe backlash of like a religious uprising. So I think about like even what happened in Iran, where you have women in the 60s being shown without any of the head coverings and
Mhm.
listening to music and creating music, and then you have this push back and all of a sudden you have an uprising of uh, a specific religion because you can't really say that it's traditional because that's not what was happening before. But
Mhm.
now you're going so far in the other direction where people think, from our standpoint, we had talked about time now being linear instead of cyclical.
Mhm.
People think, oh, well, that is tradition. We're like, yeah, but in the 60s, these women were out wearing shorts and living
Getting
their
PhDs
lives
and driving
and
cars. Yeah.
driving cars
Mhm.
and drinking and having
Mhm.
parties. But in 2010, they're covered head to toe, can't get a divorce, can't own property, can't advocate for themselves till now, where you have young women who are being killed in the streets for showing their hair,
Mhm.
killed in the streets for saying, stop killing us, for saying that we are human beings too, for saying that we deserve education and we deserve a right to say what happens to our bodies and to our autonomy. And it's kind of,
And their media is heavily
and
censored
their
to make
media is
sure
heavily
they
censored.
don't get
Mhm.
the representation that of their side of the argument or their side
Well,
of history.
and they were inspired by the internet, which
Mhm.
is it is an incredible democratic force that people can be heard and that people can hear each other's stories. I mean, you're hearing the stories of women in Iran in the past without the internet, I doubt we would hear much of that in our own country.
Hmm.
So that's a cool. The internet is this incredible progressive, regressive
Mhm.
And that's what
tool.
I say about like purpose-driven media consumption is that you can go online and decide to like investigate the evolution of women's rights in Iran rather than just watch TV and let them come up with whatever they want to show you next. And you have no control over the corporate media. They can interject anything they want. One of the things that we saw in the 1990s is that being media sensitive was the undermining of parental authority and stuff. All of a sudden, the one industry that really wanted kids not to respect their parents was sugar cereals. And so you would watch these sugar cereal ads, and it was all about how they disrespected their parents because
To get cereal.
to get cereal and
That's
all
insane.
and you would just see
Hmm.
you'd see the theme run, and it's amazing. You see these themes run through, and then you find out that there's only basically 6 PR firms or whatever. So when they decide of like, oh, we're going to show skinny women all being Karens, you know what I mean? And then there's people who actually have the name Karen out there who are kind and
Sorry,
sensitive.
Karen. Sorry,
Yeah,
not sorry.
yeah, and they got labeled that way. I mean, we met a woman who was India's counselor, and her name was Tanya Harding. Her name got ruined by Tanya Harding.
Yeah.
There was other Monica Lewinskys out in the country, and she was the first one to be online bullied. And it's Monica Lewinsky. You hear her speak today as a 50-year-old woman and say, "Look, I was taken advantage of by an older man, and he walked away scot-free, and I've been the butt of jokes,
And how did a 23-year-old
23-year-old get in
intern
trouble for this?"
become the villain of the country when
Yeah.
I mean, and then there are people who will make the argument for the opposite side, saying that that was a very lucrative move for her because in what other position would you have a young woman like that who was able to go on and write books and have TV
Only
series?
20
Right,
years
right,
later, though, at the
Sensationalism, right? Of being
right,
like,
right.
oh, all coverage is good coverage. Everything that happens to you is for your benefit, which I've
well,
always had
Mm-hmm,
a problem with that argument,
mm-hmm,
especially as it pertains to people who survive.
and then you look at like
mm-hmm.
who popularized her, who made that salacious thing was a man named Kenneth Starr, and Kenneth Starr is the one that got Jeffrey Epstein out of jail for all of his stuff, and he is the Republican, conservative, right, religious guy. And then you're just like, wow. So he was the one that wrote the report that made it so that my fourth grader came home and asked me what a job was. And I was just like, wow, so this is the Republican Party. They're just nasty. They're just
Things
nasty,
you can't say
nasty,
on
nasty.
television, the
Yeah,
Republican Party, they're just nasty.
they're just nasty.
This is our agenda for today. I hope you know.
Well, going back to something, Kylie, you said earlier about this perception of that the U.S. is just number one. And so internationally, we had this incredible reputation due to Coke and Pepsi commercials showing us just being rockin' and cool and everything. But
cool.
also, the United States, one of our main exports is media. And during the 90s, one of the fun facts in media literacy we had was that the number one watched show around the world was Baywatch in the
That's
90s. And I think,
that's fascinating.
and I would say, anecdotally from traveling and talking to people around the world, they are obsessed with Friends. When you travel internationally,
Right now,
people
Friends
are
is number one.
obsessed with Friends.
Which, because no, so if you look at the media, if you have history of media and you see how Friends was formatted, and you look at shows like Girlfriends, for instance, they had like a huge uprising, like in the 90s and early 2000s, of shows with primarily Black casting. Where they came up with these formulas, you'd already seen them, and then they get canceled, and you have a show like Friends that comes on, which is showing like the same formula, but all of a sudden it's way more popular, and you start canceling these other shows, which I'm just like,
Really? I didn't know
sad.
that.
Oh, if it has
So
to,
it was
if it,
originally a show
yeah.
called Girlfriends.
Well, no,
Or,
I mean
there was a
there were other
format.
shows
Right,
out,
right.
like, okay, so for instance, Living Single would have
Okay.
been the Black version of Friends, or the original version of Friends.
Oh,
I don't know if you
interesting.
ever watched that show.
No, I never
We
heard of
are
it.
living single in a 90s kind of world. I'm glad I got my girls, and it was a show that had primarily women at the forefront.
Mm-hmm.
And they all worked different jobs. You had one in speaking of media literacy, she had her own magazine. She was a journalist, and she had articles. This Queen Latifah was the main lead on that. You had a showcasing of dark-skinned women, who was a powerful lawyer.
Mm-hmm.
You had all of these different versions of Black women that had not been portrayed before in different professions. And then you had also just the high-paying corporate jobs down to the handyman, and how they all live together in this one apartment complex and live their daily lives, their parents, different backgrounds, financial struggles,
So it's a
you name it.
30-minute sitcom.
Yeah, 30-minute sitcom, and
Yeah.
it was Friends.
Oh,
It's
I want to see
friends
that.
that get together.
Right.
They share their lives. They become each other's family, and it was essentially Friends before Friends.
So
And
what was
then
it called
Friends
again?
came. Living Single.
Living
Mhm.
Single.
Yeah.
Okay, we will watch it.
Yes, please do. It is so good.
Mhm.
Shove it, friends. No. not that I didn't.
But we
like,
were
also
just in
watch
Turkey,
Friends.
and they were just everybody's about Friends, and then we were in Greece, and everybody's about
Everybody's about Friends.
And they want to
and-
ask us, have
Yeah.
we
Have
seen
you
Friends?
seen Friends?
Yeah.
And also, I do love the time that it takes for a culture to move across and shift across. And like, you'll see now that like hip hop's very popular in India,
Mhm.
and you're starting to see a cross of like traditional dances, and sometimes it's like people talk about like appropriation versus appreciation,
Mhm.
and how like American culture gets consumed and then reflected back, just based off of the different areas and what people will pick from it. And it's kind of ironic that a lot of what is consumed and reflected back is Black media, and it's venerated in all of these other nations, but not here,
Mm.
which is kind of funny.
Well, one of the things of the internet coming in and media going global is that, the discovery of how many American hit shows were British shows first,
Aha!
and completely different.
The
Like,
Office. I see you, The Office.
right. Well, we watched a show called Ghosts, and it was a BBC show, and it was really interesting. And now they have an American version. Now, Ghosts, because it's a BBC show, had only 8 episodes a season. Being an American show, it
Interesting.
has 24 or
And
22.
everybody's younger and way hotter in the
Yeah.
American
Yeah.
version.
And you get to see the difference. But,
Ooh, the
to-
hotness scale of
Mhm,
American
mhm.
television is interesting.
It is very funny, though.
But
Yeah,
for media
hilarious.
literacy, it's really interesting to be able to distinguish between these things. Like, I get back into the early parts of media and the difference between Bewitched with a woman witch who had powers and really ruled the roost in her show, and her husband was a jingle writer or a commercial guy, as opposed to on the other channel they're running I Dream of Jeannie, which is an
Mhm.
astronaut who has this woman
Who lives in a bottle.
yeah,
She's
and
indeed in a
serves
bottle.
him
And doesn't she call him Master? or
and
Yes.
calls him master.
And
Yeah.
wears an adorable two-piece outfit.
But which show
Scantily clad,
gets
yes.
Yes.
She brought her
syndicated?
boobs.
Which
Yeah.
show gets syndicated and which show is shown over and over and over? I Dream of Jeannie.
Of course.
So then you're just like, okay, somebody made that choice. See,
it's
this
the
is
bimbification.
nothing on TV.
Ah,
Yeah.
Bimbification.
The
That
bimbification.
But
word of
living,
the day.
living single isn't big in Turkey right now because Friends is it, and somebody made that choice. Do you know that who's the guy Bannon? No, Bannon, Steve Bannon, the terrible guy that created Trump. He's
Mhm.
been.
The
I
guy
loved
with
it
bad,
when
the guy with bad skin.
Hassan Minaj did
Oh,
the White
Lord.
House Correspondents' Dinner, and he goes, "Steve Bannon, I do not see Steve Bannon, not see."
Not
Steve,
Nazi Steve, are you here? Nazi Steve, please,
Yeah.
are you here? Raise your hand.
But
Hello?
he made his money by buying the rights of the international distribution of Seinfeld.
Ooh.
And
Smart.
so then you find out that that's what's bankrolling this white supremacist who is the one leading the Jews will not replace us Charleston thing, and you're just like,
Weird.
yeah, but the thing is that what makes the billionaires nowadays? What makes people rich? It's media moguls, and so we haven't figured out how to distribute income adequately in the media industry. It's producing super rich people who have way too much political control, way too much agenda setting control, and they are not public interest people. These are toxic narcissists who grabbed up the rights or whatever. And so, even the Black community, you could have where Black Lives Matter. You could have people who get in the lead of movements. I mean, it was in the 60s, the FBI would do plants who would try to discredit a movement by doing violence at a protest when they're working to discredit the movement, and
I mean, speaking of media literacy, the access to technology, the internet, and the Black Lives Matter movement, when the George Floyd protests were happening in San Jose, I lived down there at the time, and you would see police officers leaving out bricks and setting off fireworks. And then you would hear later in the news, oh, protesters brought such and I was like, protesters didn't bring that stuff. We literally watch. And then you start seeing people posting like, nope, this is officer so-and-so
Mhm.
putting this here. Oh, this is officer so-and-so doing this. This is officer so-and-so pushing the line first, having the first interaction. This was
Mhm.
a peaceful protest before. This is an excessive show of force. This is, we're able to see like, no, actually the sounds that you're hearing going off at regular intervals at night, this is actually designed to keep you sleepless, afraid, and
Mhm.
unable to unify. These are tactics that have been used throughout time. These are wartime tactics, and be educated. So we're starting to tell people what you can do to counteract pepper spray, how to create your own body armor from home, how to protect yourselves from a police force that is out literally to get you as a citizen, and having those conversations, going to City Hall and saying, hey, so why do they need a fleet of Teslas? Why have you increased this funding, but you haven't actually allocated any of it to training? Because you've said that this funding was for training because you've had so
Well, what
many
about Police City
incidences.
going on in Atlanta? And then look at when we were in the 90s in Monterey, they had a proposal where they were going to do a domestic invasion of our city here, and the
I
police.
think from the water,
Yeah,
wasn't
they were
it?
going to practice from the water, and it was the snowy plover that is a endangered species animal that lives
Uh-huh.
there that prevented them from practicing like how they would do a city invasion from the water on Monterey. And you wonder about that. Like, how did they pick Monterey? I mean, is it because of
I mean, I think we know why
DLI?
we picked Monterey.
Yeah.
If you ever had a group of citizens who were armed with knowledge, history, and like access, this would be one of the spaces.
Well,
Or maybe to defend the military bases.
Yeah, I was like, we have all the bases and all the schools here.
Well, they
True,
told us
right,
10
true.
days before 9/11 that there was going to be a terrorist attack on domestic soil, and they closed the DLI. And you can look it up on the internet. And
It was in the Herald.
Yeah.
That there was a chatter that there's a terrorist attack imminent, and it was all in the Herald through August.
There were 2 thoroughfares through.
And so they locked up the DLI,
DLI.
and they never unlocked it. Because we used to be able to drive through DLI to get from one side of Monterey to PG, and now
Now you have to go through the tunnel.
Yeah.
But
that was not done after September 11th. That was done in August.
So they
It was closed up.
revisited opening DLI 10 years later in 2011, and 9/11 was in 2001. And so it is documented on the internet that they did close DLI 10 days before 9/11, and they did tell us that there was going to be a terrorist attack on domestic soil, which we thought was just ludicrous that they would say that. And then there was the guy that was head of the Big Sur Marathon. His name was Lieutenant Colonel Butler, and he was on DLI. And then he wrote a letter to the Herald saying if Bush didn't actually do 9/11, then he knew about it and let it happen. And then the next day that went to the front page of the New York Times. And so then it turned out he was about 4 years away from retirement, and he had criticized the commander-in-chief, which is mutinous. And then instead of like prosecuting him, they just pushed him into retirement. All that is on the internet. Everybody has their theories about 9/11, stuff like that, but this is, what we saw. I mean, we're talking about representation in the media, is that the military does a lot of bankrolling. When we were doing our documentary and stuff like that, we went on the CIA site, and they said if you portray the CIA in a positive light, that they will give you all this B-roll of flying over CIA headquarters. They'll subsidize you, and it was actually on their website that you could get this stuff. And then you watch how many shows are about the CIA.
Oh, maybe we should go on the CIA website and get some, because you can get establishing shots of flyovers of I think any country in the world.
I was gonna say, was that 48 hours? Or was it 24?
24?
Is it
yeah.
24 hours?
And you know what show that replaced? So that was a Thursday night show, Dark Angel, with what's
Jessica Alba.
Jessica Alba, and it's a really cool female show.
Where she was one of the really early female superheroes. That she was some kind of mutant or something. She had superpower somehow.
Right, and she had a great time slot, and then 9/11 happened, and they started with 24 hours or whatever, and it was always about, every show was about how torture works. If you torture someone, and you will get the truth. And that was when Dick Cheney was like, hey, waterboarding's not a violation of the Geneva Code, and all that stuff.
I do remember a lot of that propaganda coming out, because it was a lot of the, United States, you're using the same tactics that have been banned by the Geneva Convention. And we were like, oh, but it's a necessary action.
And it doesn't work.
And torture, that's not evidence-based. Evidence shows that kindness and listening to a detainee is much more likely to get a confession or information than torture. Torture is not effective. That's
You can get them to express what they don't like about their side, and then they'll give up information that you need. And it's a tactic that works so beautifully and has been used over and over. And torture is a way where you get nothing or you get a lot of false information. People make false confessions under torture and they'll give false information. And so it's not reliable.
It's one of those things that's portrayed always on TV is really effective and working well.
Mhm.
Also, hard alcohol. I mean, I feel like
Right, get them drunk, make them sleepy.
no, I just mean people drink on TV and they don't get drunk.
Oh yeah,
They drink
crazy.
on TV and they don't get sick. I mean, they're just sitting there just pounding drink after drink after drink and they're fine. They're not slurring their words. They're beautiful,
Beautiful.
in
people.
control.
Yeah,
But there's just a lot. It's
representation. Is that you
Lies.
see it.
This is Liza Minnelli lies.
Right. It's like, oh, you got a raise at work. Well, where do you go? You take your friends to a bar and you go get drunk. Oh, you just got divorced. Where do you go? You get your friends and you go to a bar and get drunk. And so you just see all these shows rotating or orbiting around a bar scene and alcohol, or you see them even like some shows have made fun of it where they'll put like 4 people sitting there with 16 glasses of alcohol as if, you
Amy
know.
Schumer did a funny skit where she had was pretending she was some popular TV show, and every scene her wine glass got bigger and bigger until she was just holding this thing
Right.
that was the size of a barrel, a wine glass the size of a barrel. But
That's product placement. you know.
yeah, but it's this media propaganda and fantasy of problem solving that torture can solve problems, that hard alcohol can solve
That you're an
problems.
adult if you smoke and drink.
Mhm,
Yeah, that's
mhm,
toxic. You're an adult if you can swear, which I
mhm.
also think is really interesting. Looking at how language has changed and the idea of like you're a grown up if you can swear. That's what makes you grown. You're a grown man when you can win your fights. That's what
Mhm.
makes you grown. When you can just use force, that's what makes you strong.
hmm
Just a lot of these ideas of what it means, like, oh, if you can kill, then you're an adult, you're willing to sacrifice, you're an adult.
Mhm.
Just a lot of weird things that don't really have to do with like cognitive maturity and like developing your brain
Well, the
is
getting punched in the
fascinating.
face and being okay. And then, just like shaking it off and
Yeah,
stuff like
shake it
that.
off.
And then,
Mhm.
somebody who isn't adequate thinker
Well, because I
will
feel
think they
like
can punch somebody in the face and it's not going to be devastating. It's not going to be a broken nose or a broken cheek or a lifelong affliction, repercussions. So,
or a legal.
because
I
the
mean,
media can do it where you jump off a building and you land safely,
Ooh,
I mean,
so speaking of like censorship and bloodshed, and we had talked about
mhm.
Turkey beforehand, they have an incredible show called Resurrection Ertugrul, and it's interesting to look at because their episodes are like over an hour long. So then you can clearly see that like, okay, so ads aren't like the television there is not running the
Mhm.
same way. And then the censorship of bloodshed, it's not that they don't show the repercussions of like sword fighting or like riding horseback or all these fights, but it's just edited or blurred in a way so that like there are repercussions, but they just don't want to make it so visually impactful.
Mm.
So I think that's a really fascinating and smart way to do it. Um, this is like a historical show, so they do show, like the fight between having all these Templars come through and like they're the bad guys, which is always an interesting take as an American, I guess, watching or someone from a Western culture being like, huh, see, they're calling it out. They are clearly calling it out. You
correct.
guys are
Mhm.
here raping, pillaging, murdering, doing all of the nefarious things, putting up crosses and not, you know, it's not the missionary work that we are told that it was here of
Mhm.
you're spreading the good word and building schools and feeding the people and you're like they're taking over land and like slaughtering tribes and burning
Mhm.
down mosques and things like that.
The whitewashing of
The whitewashing
whitewashing
of
of massacres.
massacres,
Yeah.
yes.
Mhm.
So it's really an excellent show. It's on Netflix.
Okay.
Yeah, so like
Interesting.
check it out.
I love watching Netflix shows from other countries. It's always
Yeah.
really. We watched one that was filmed in Turkey about the history. It wasn't really. It was a sci-fi show, but within the sci-fi storyline, this woman was researching the goddesses of Göbekli Tepe, the oldest
They
archaeological
made a
site.
show about you, India. They
Mhm.
just said, "Oh, you know what? Let's just make a show about her. This is a woman,
was
and
really good.
she's investigating goddesses. Here she is. Hi."
Yeah, so somehow that resonated with me.
Somehow.
Yeah, somehow. But it was just really interesting. And then to go to Turkey, I wonder how much watching that show influenced our
Clearly,
wanting to go to
media
Turkey.
literacy.
Yeah,
They
probably.
planted the seed.
Mhm.
Go to Turkey.
I think subliminally, because we didn't consciously do it, but when we got there, we saw that. There was another
We
show.
actually forgot about that show, and when we got to Turkey, we were like, "Oh, that's right. We were really
yeah.
into that Turkish
Yeah.
show about goddesses."
When
and
we
now
realized we were at one of the sites that had been on the
show,
and we're
portrayed
like,
in
wow.
the show. Yeah.
But another sci-fi show that we really liked in the 90s was called Sliders. And it was this guy opens up this time vortex and he transports into parallel realities.
Ooh.
And all the episodes were like, oh, if the Nazis would have won the war, if women were the dominant gender and men
Mhm.
were oppressed, and it was all these great things. And it
We
was
have a lot of shows like that now. That's really cool.
it was
Mhm.
filmed up in British Columbia, and what happened was Fox was bought it. Fox buys, they're the ones that canceled Firefly. So
Yeah,
what they do
boo.
is they buy up the really best sci-fi concepts, and then they show it for one season. They cancel it because they own it. They can shelve it. Fox felt that they had gotten too out of control being up in British Columbia, so they brought them down to LA, and they did an episode of Everybody Lives in a Mall in a parallel universe. And what happened was they said the professor was this guy, and he is the professor from Indiana Jones. So if you go to Disneyland, he's the bearded guy, but he was the actor, and he would always go off script because he believed that his role could be better written, and they actually fired him and they stabbed him in the back, and he talks about how that was literally they stabbed him in the back to get rid of his character.
He
'cause
actually went off script in the
he-
last episode that they filmed with him in it, and he says, "Oh no, I think I've been stabbed in the back."
Right, and Fox said we don't want it to be social commentary. We want it to be a chase show. So they created a villain who chases them through the portals, and then it became just a shooting.
And then they got a
Shoot.
really hot girl with
and then
breast
Wade.
implants, and then she became the new cast member, and they had this.
Huh.
Yeah, and they had.
Bimbification, you say?
Yep, bimbification, word of the day.
Yes.
And then they
Had the original woman.
the
who
original
was-
woman who had been a really strong character, the
silenced
the
her.
whole last season she had no lines, so she'd just be like acting. She'd just be acting her head off with her eyes and no words coming out of her mouth. It was just the new young Hollywood chick got all the lines, and she couldn't act.
And so that's in the extras of the DVD. And then he went on, the guy that was.
And then
the
they
lead of it.
replaced Sliders with what show? And they took it off the air.
God, I forget.
There was
Like
something.
the Smothers Brothers were very political, and they decided that they wanted to get rid of them, and they replaced them with Hee Haw.
Ooh.
So I mean, you just see this. You see the gist of how if you get good conscious media, it will be bought by somebody powerful and then squashed. And that's how investigative journalism is doing. That's how newspapers. The newspaper that broke the Jeffrey Epstein story was a woman named Julie Brown.
Mm-hmm.
Right, and she
Correct,
was
Julie Brown.
a local reporter, and she broke the whole Jeffrey Epstein thing.
And then
her-
she wouldn't let it go.
Right,
She
and-
kept reporting on it for like 15 years when they just kept saying, "Oh no, there's no story here."
and her paper just got bought out, and of course now she's out of a job. Is that somebody big came in, and it's easy to buy up. Like all the local radio stations were all bought up, so that you don't have a DJ who will ever express any concern for things that are happening in your community. They do it with the local news. I mean, if you look at the news stations here in Monterey, they're not run by anybody local. It would be good if you put an ownership limit that the person who owns a news broadcast station has to live within a 120-mile radius of that station. You could do things like that. They did that with savings and loans, is that they could only lend money within a 90-mile within 90 miles of the brick and mortar.
We're really in need of any kind of localism. Any kind
Yeah.
of localism laws would be fantastic. I mean,
To
I
give
think-
us power over our community, because right now they're just lumping us all together and they just see us pawns, and they'll close down all your radio stations. They'll close down all your TV newscasts.
Yeah.
right, but Pacific Grove still has KAZU, I believe. I believe that's still a
We have
locally-
KMBY.
There still
Yeah.
are some local
I mean, it's
stations.
really hard to imagine this area without K-Pig.
Right?
Like,
Mhm.
I don't agree with everything that K-Pig plays, or like a lot of their views, but I can say that that has been a consistent staple pretty much my entire life.
Hmm.
Mhm.
That they've always had artists that they showcase. They've always had like slightly offbeat uh, takes on things, and
Mhm.
so as someone who's representing local flair, I was like, yeah, how weird would it be if you had no K-Pig?
Yeah.
Independent, non-corporate media is just precious, you
And
know?
it's not going to be as polished. And it's not going to be, they're not going to use the catalog of songs that are most popular and stuff like that. But you have to like put forth the effort to support these and know why you're doing it. Again, conscious watching, like don't
Conscious consumption,
conscious
like
consumption.
reading labels on your food.
So we had talked about like some people just don't read the labels on food because it does take up a lot of mind space, and there's a lot of education that goes into that, and a lot of people feel like, oh, yeah, I'm too old to learn that. I don't
Mhm.
want to have to reframe my whole existence based on this. Do you find that media literacy um, kind of goes the same way of people not wanting to have to question as much like the content that they're watching, and then do research behind who's writing the shows, you know,
I
what
think
directors are doing in real life? Can you not watch a show even though the show is great, but you find out the people behind it are
you find
terrible?
out Woody, yeah, you're like,
Woody Allen.
you're like, oh no.
Well, and the other thing is that, like, okay, let's say I'm a big corporation and I want to control the agenda. And so I can't control which movies are being made, but I can buy up all the movie theaters. And then all of a sudden, what you do is you find out that certain movies will not be shown. They will not be shown in a major movie
Yeah, there's
theater.
production and then there's distribution, and
Yeah.
conscious woke messages can be stamped out at all those levels. But did you know there's been this big media merger of somebody and somebody? I think it's like Paramount and somebody else, and they actually
Canceled shows that had already been filmed.
no, but I was gonna say the film Batgirl. They already made it. They had it in the
Yeah.
can. They already filmed it, edited it, everything, and then they just said it wasn't good enough, and they just killed it. And it was an African American woman lead superhero, and there was just reason, and it was about to go to movie theaters everywhere, and there was a media merger, and the new owner didn't want it, and they also
Media
can't.
mergers, and the more I learn about mergers and like hostile takeovers, I'm just like, what a
Oh,
destructive.
they got rid of Gentleman Jack.
My favorite lesbian
Yeah.
show.
Oh.
See, and the thing is that it was an ownership
They
change. It had nothing to do with viewership.
They killed like 5 shows that I watch that have strong female leads, as well as Batwoman.
Mm-hmm.
This
Mhm.
just it to me it will always bring me back to Buffy,
Mhm.
the Vampire Slayer, just because that was a show that I watched with my aunt growing up, and there were 8 seasons that I watched religiously.
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
And because I'm a nerd, I read the comics afterwards.
Our daughter has
continue
all of them.
to read the comics.
Our daughter has the Willow. When Willow gets
Yes!
upset,
Oh
she bought
my
that
God!
online. Yeah.
Beautiful. Right. So I
Yeah.
have all of that lovely, gorgeous content, and then I have Joss Whedon.
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
All right.
And then I have Charisma Carpenter talking out about what her experience was like being in Buffy the Vampire Slayer, and
Sarah.
then being in Angel, and then you have Sarah speaking out,
Mhm.
Mhm.
and then you have all of these cast members who are talking about the horrific things that happen behind the scenes. You have the writers who are talking about what the process was like for them, and you see what Joss continuously does to his female lead characters. And yeah, it's always a twist. You do have these beautiful women who are empowered,
Mhm.
but there's something that has come with the cost of that power that actually disqualifies them as functioning women in main societal view.
In the storyline
Mhm.
Yes.
that you see,
Oh, right.
you overlooked or glossed over the.
Or just something that you didn't process as a child and that becomes very clear and apparent to
But
you
when
as a
we
grown up.
right, but when we got Buffy, there
Mhm.
wasn't a lot of choices of female superheroes. That's
No.
like
No, Buffy was
So we
amazing.
weren't too picky. It's like they just Black Panther just did a Latino hero, and we're really excited about that. And all of Mexico was so proud and excited, and I was like, I came out of it like, yes, but he's also the villain.
Yikes.
Uh,
There's a lot of yikes in
I
that.
talked to Latinos about this and like, how do you feel about the new Black Panther? And they're like, you know what? We just got to be happy with what we get because representation is representation. But we do wish it was better. But at least it's something.
It's something.
At least our story is being told. And then we talked to our daughter, who has grown up all her life in Mexico, and she was like, the representation of this Mexican character is so ridiculous. She was like, it would be if you had, for the first time, portrayal of a white Californian as a superhero, but he had a Texas accent. And then he talked.
Because he didn't get it right.
Yeah.
And then he talked and used like a lot of Jewish terms, like, "Oh, I have schmutz on my jacket," you know. And so she said that's.
Oy vey, let's hit the waves. Like, what? What happened there? Okay.
But as a native Mexican, she was like, "Yeah, I mean, okay." So they did some music that was from like the Mayan culture, and then they did costumes that were from like Oaxaca, and then you know what I mean, like
nothing was right. Nothing was.
The representation was like way off.
There's too many representations. They tried to put them all into one, which is problematic in and of itself.
So they didn't have a proper Mexican historian, obviously guiding the story.
Clearly.
And that's exciting to know. That's the media literacy. That's what makes media fun to consume, because you do digest it. And the people who can't read media, who can't deconstruct it that way, who don't think that deep when they're watching media, they're like, oh, I just put this on to go brainless, is that they're just watchers. And it turns out that that's actually very damaging and harmful to you if you're not participating in your viewership. If you're just letting it hit you, then they have tactics and they're using them on you, because in your ignorance, you may be bliss. But
and so,
what you're missing is what you miss.
Well, I said in our first hour of find a media literacy curriculum from Australia or England or Canada and do it with your kids. And I don't think that critical thinking skills diminish viewing. I think it make it a lot more satisfying. It makes it a much richer experience, and especially if you're watching media with your children and your children are media literate, you're going to have wonderful conversations. And so then watching TV time is not just checking out and entertainment. It's also you're tuning into messages and you're thinking deeper, and I think it makes it really fun. I think media literacy is great fun.
Because these are the conversations we have after watching a movie, after watching a TV show, is that the show doesn't just end for us. We're just like...
Then the conversation starts.
Right.
Then we're like, the iceberg.
Did you see The Neighbor? Or, like Chris Rock, why did you take that role? And he's like, hey, they paid me. But Adam Sandler is never going to portray you adequately enough for who you are. I mean, Chris Rock is one of our heroes, and we don't ever want to see him hurt, put down, or be a buffoon in media.
But he does get paid to do those roles, and he talks about it in his routines.
But he's smart enough to talk about it. That's, he teaches us so much often in that his view. And, he was revelatory in the 90s when he came out. I mean, he was an amazing...
he was a complete paradigm shift. I feel like he advanced critical thinking.
He got the conversation
as much
going.
as Seinfeld. Like Seinfeld got us really thinking about things in a new
nuances
way, and Chris Rock too.
Mm-hmm. And then there's problematic with people. You know what I mean? Joss Whedon. I mean, come on, Buffy. We raised our daughter on Buffy because Buffy was kick-ass, and then Willow and all that, and then Joss Whedon, blah blah blah. I mean,
but
yes, Buffy was kick-ass, but then Angel, there was always like a clear problematic issue with the 400-year-old vampire getting with a 16-year-old girl, and setting up this idea that you want the stoic, powerful older man as a younger woman. Like,
did you ever watch Dollhouse?
Yes, and then right after we had Dollhouse, look, this is my my deep rooted shame. Like if there's like the guilty pleasure, it would be like I consume a lot of Joss Whedon media. I am a
Okay,
Firefly
okay.
person. I'm a Dollhouse person. But I look at what he does to his female characters.
You're
Mhm.
safe here.
This is a safe space.
This is a safe space, and we also have seen everything Joss Whedon made, and
Everything.
also we own the comic books.
There's a lot of just straight up rape of women in all of his
Mm,
shows. Every single
yep,
show.
yep.
Whether it be mental, because we're talking, if we look at Firefly,
hmm
that's an institution that went in and just clearly the rape is not a physical one in that show. I mean, they do address some of the physical um, slights against women. And there are a lot of interesting things that are addressed, especially when it comes to like Paxlovid and controlling populations, which Pax is like an actual drug that is used now for
Mhm.
mood swings and emotional
Mm.
control. That does have the side effect of rage and does have the side effect of suicidal and homicidal ideations. Like these are real drugs that are functioning in society that we see, and we have media that's showing you like, hey, this is a reality. And so part of the media literacy, I was like, yeah, well, can you be a show that is real and not have these portrayals? Because currently this is the real plight of a lot of women, that if you are in a role of power, that you are not seen as a true viable woman. If you can't bear children, you're seen as a lesser form as a woman, and looking at these power dynamics. And so it's like, it's wrong, but it's not wrong. But then also it's like, did you have to portray it that way? You really didn't. You could have let us have the representation and show us what
hmm
the world could be, and examples of cases where they are successful and powerful and they didn't have to like die or be in some way.
But
It
some
could have
people,
been better.
It could
right?
have been
It could have
better.
been better.
Some people ask us, "Are you demanding too much from your media?"
Yeah.
And I am, yes.
Yes.
You know what I mean? I'm not unapologetic about it. I am unapologetic about it. But when Battlestar Galactica came out and it was huge, and the lead person was Starbuck, which was from Starbucks, as Starbucks was taking over the country, and the swear word was frack or fracking when fracking was taking over the country.
hmm
And you're just like, wow, to use those in this storyline that we're all, I mean, there's the product placement,
And the female hero was named Starbuck. That was her
Starbuck.
name.
Jesus.
And when she would get frustrated, she'd say, "Oh, frack,"
Ah,
or "You're a
frack.
fracking jerk." Or,
You are a fracking jerk.
Right, so there's a disillusion or whatever, some
You
watering
definitely
down of these terms. Starbucks came in and it displaced all the old coffee houses that all had stages that had open mic night. And so one of the things that we think should be legislated is that all Starbucks should be required to have a stage, and they should actually be putting some of their money towards local musicians to perform on those stages, maybe singer-songwriters or something, because they came, and everybody's like, oh, Starbucks with their drive-through and all that stuff. But I mean, they got rid of these community centers, which were part of our civic equipment. You
the
went
coffee
to the
house with the
coffee
stage.
house with the open mic night, and
hmm
people don't even know that it's gone. And so, you walk into a Starbucks and you just say that corner there should be an 8 by 8 by 8 foot a stage, and they should have a sound system, and they should let somebody be singing off key in a guitar that they don't tune, whatever.
I
But it's just part
also
of it.
love that we are here at AMP,
hmm
and around the corner is the coffee house with the stage that had open mic nights every Wednesday, and I myself was a regular. And
Or Juice and Java
yeah,
in
or
Pacific
Juice and
Grove.
Java.
hmm
And I met so many good people in those spaces, and
But
local
two 10-year-old
musicians.
girls would get up and sing. I mean, it was
Off-beat.
just, yeah, and it was joyous. It was real. It was
And
real.
what is it now? Is it still there?
It's still a coffee house. It's still there. I'm not sure if they still do the open mic nights.
Mm.
The area has changed a lot. There's been
hmm
like restaurants that have been put in, and it used to be like a larger gathering space for like the homeless population here. And I think there's some of the
Mm,
gentrification of like not wanting to have that space be there because there used to be like a lot of chalk art and everything that would
mm,
happen.
mm.
But I think also COVID shut down a lot of things. So
Right,
we're kind of
right.
seeing the community come back, especially with the farmers market nights and things like that. So I don't know. I'm hoping that maybe they'll open their stage back up.
Well, I ran the numbers. I ran the numbers on how many Starbucks there are,
Ugh.
and I don't remember. I have to do my math, but it was like there's this many Starbucks
How many
in
Starbucks per capita?
right. There's this many Starbucks in the U.S., and let's say that like two independent singer-songwriters could perform there a day, like give an hour.
Hmm.
Then I mean, it was eliminating in the tens of thousands of a place where an independent artist could be heard
Public
and make a little
stages.
bit of money.
And make a little bit of money. But
Mm-hmm.
also, I was just doing like some quick numbers because we're not even counting the Starbucks that end up inside of Target
Mm-hmm.
and
Hmm.
inside of other little stores. I'm like, how interesting would it be if Walmart had a stage? If Target had a stage, if all of
Right.
Mm-hmm.
these like
Mm-hmm.
super centers actually did
Yeah, Costco. Can you
Costco.
imagine? Costco
I
has
would
an
love Costco. Costco would rock. Grocery outlet
Mm-hmm.
is
Mm-hmm.
always having the banging oldies. They could totally have a live music hour, and
Okay.
people would show
Okay,
up.
Jimmy. How do we do a people's proposition to get
Yes, this
local
is the action
singer-songwriter
part of our
yeah,
podcast.
regional flair? We want local singer-songwriters. We want them in we want them in Starbucks. We want them in Costco. We want them in Walmart.
anybody who has a parking lot that's more than 50 cars parks. Then you just say you have to part of your public interest or community involvement is going to require promoting local talent.
But you can do a people's proposition and get it on the ballot.
But
I mean,
see,
that is one of the things that people can do. I'm not exactly sure how, but I know that it's our right as the First Amendment.
I think
but we
we
have no
should
culture.
have even if you're like worried about people, you could have like a rooftop stages, and we have the
Mm-hmm.
technology
Hmm.
now because you have all of the computer screens. You could just
Mm-hmm.
be projecting that rooftop show onto your screen or through your intercom and then
Mm-hmm.
let them,
Yeah, what if you
get
just
attention.
got
Mm-hmm.
on and it had your local coffee
Well,
shop and it
live
was open
stream.
mic night and you could
Yeah,
be at home watching it
that
even.
sounds
And
fascinating.
Well,
then
that's
you could
something.
and you have a tip jar.
Let's do
You have a
that.
tip jar
It
right
could be
there.
on amp too.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
We in our documentary on our media activism, we had a section called culture building. And the whole idea was that, everybody says, oh, the United States doesn't have a culture. We just have a commercial culture, a corporate culture. But the thing is that our communities are a canvas for us to create culture. How do you think these things came into being? And so what we have to do is structure it. And like I always said, I'm looking for the revenue stream of keeping it going, taxing, advertising. I think that, now people have to pay tax on their property, right? Well, I mean, you could have it where people pay taxes for their cars that are registered in your community.
Luxury cars.
Luxury
Let's
cars.
not
Yeah,
let's
yeah, yeah.
not burden the poor and middle class
And
anymore.
Yeah,
and
we're
we've
overly burdened.
always capped the taxes like Social Security. We say, oh, you pay up to 120,000, and then after that, you don't have to pay Social Security tax. Well, that lets the people who are above that income level get out of paying taxation. Where the true way that it's supposed to be is that everybody under this level is supposed to pay taxes. Okay, here's one thing: is that with banks, is that if you have a low amount of money in your bank, it's supposed to be free, because you don't have the money to pay for your banking. Everybody needs banking to exist. But now we have it like, oh no, you have to have this much money in the bank to have free banking. And that has turned the initial legislation upside down. Rich people aren't supposed to get away with getting free stuff. Poor people get free stuff
Did you
because
know
they
that?
can't afford it.
Did you know that rich people don't have to pay into Social Security when we all
Or
have
they
to
don't have to
pay
pay for their banking.
15% into
I
it?
am aware of many
Yeah. But minimum
back
actually-
scratching that which people get. So seriously, back to civil duties and what we can do on a local level. Would this be something that you could take to City Hall and say, hey, as a city proposal, I would like to have this be like citywide ordinances? Can we include this?
Yes.
I don't know. Let's try.
Let's try
Let's
it.
do it. Let's
Believe it or
pretend
not.
we're Republicans getting books out of schools.
Yeah.
And let's go do it.
Local action. We need to start doing local action. And one of the things that really has a lot of power over your community is your city council.
There we go.
And
Mhm.
so you can do ordinances. I mean, we think that, they've done this aggressive use of health and safety. We were talking recently about Cannery Row and them not allowing street vendors down there because they said the pedestrian traffic is so thick that if you were to put street vendors there, it would push the pedestrians out onto the roadway and they could get hit by a car. And we said, oh, you're absolutely right. Cars shouldn't be allowed on Cannery Row. You should block it off and make a pedestrian stroll. You just said there's a health and safety issue, and that would lead to the banning of cars, not the banning of street vendors. See, so they don't understand their logic is to promote corporatization and to squash community and
Well,
local
and
flair.
it's a safety issue because you have
It's
so
a
many
safety issue.
pedestrians, and it isn't really a safe space for
It's
cars.
not
But
a safe
also, like,
space for
mental
cars.
health and safety as well.
Right.
Let's go for that. Like, you need to have,
But
for the health of your community, for the
Mhm,
benefit of your
mhm.
community, spaces for people to vend.
But
Mhm.
not all cars would be banned from the pedestrian stroll because the businesses there need to drive up their vans and unload, and their employees maybe need to park on the side of their business and stuff like that. So it's not a complete ban of, because in Europe, as Americans, we all know you rent a car in Europe and somehow you end up driving on a pedestrian stroll. And everybody's like, what are you doing? And you're like, I'm so lost. I don't know where I am.
Because they have
And-
a lot of spaces where cars aren't allowed. In
Right,
Europe.
but
So-
cars can access that because the local businesses there need to be able to pull their van up and unload. So of course it's not prevented, but you're not, and that's how they could do it. I mean, I looked at Cannery Row and I thought, there's no access to a major parking lot here. This whole thing could be blocked off on the side streets that lead to Cannery Row, and then the entire Cannery Row, because there is.
What a beautiful pedestrian stroll it would be,
It'd be
right up to
beautiful.
But
the
also,
ocean. Yeah.
if you're not local, then you probably wouldn't know. They have like the seasonal, the Jolly Trolley, the Holly
Mhm.
Jolly Trolley. So we could have something where we have our Holly Jolly Trolley that's year round that takes people from parking lot to destination and make it safer that way. And you'd be creating more jobs.
And the wave,
Mhm.
the
And
wave.
the wave.
And the
You
wave
could do
should be
that with
extended.
eco-friendly vehicles.
And
So
the wave
let's
should
do
be
that.
extended. It should be
It should go out to Seaside.
yeah, and the wave should make it so that people can do their shopping, actually get to a supermarket and get home using the wave and get all these cars off. We're really looking at like how do you diminish the importance of cars and how do you give pedestrian traffic priority? And there's just all these incredibly imaginative and ultimately community fulfillment. It'll lift the quality of life.
And a lot of these changes are being made in Europe right now as we speak, and around the world. So these proposals of limiting where cars can go and making more pedestrian friendly and even converting roads into parks is something that has been happening around the world. So that's some really exciting solutions that are happening.
So there's like, we're looking at Monterey in a lot of ways of like, how do you increase the curb appeal of Monterey and the least cost ways of doing it? And what aspects of Monterey history do we want to glorify as opposed to the aspects of history that are there? I did a history on John C. Fremont, Fremont Avenue, and he's not a good guy. So
Oh
I mean,
no,
yeah.
you don't say.
Yeah, and so we can rename these. We can rename these
How
areas.
about we were thinking
And it would
Jimi
cost
Hendrix.
nothing.
We were thinking Jimi
Or
Hendrix.
Otis Redding Way.
Mhm.
Otis Redding Way.
I
Anyway,
I
but-
would love that, and also it would just make it so we have names that we can feel joyful driving
Mhm.
down. Las Vegas just did one where they named a whole community after Pokemon
Mhm.
because they were running out of names, and they're like, "How sweet would it be to like drive up Jigglypuff Lane?"
And you can't,
So
and you
local
can't-
flair.
Emerson said that every generation has to rewrite history so as to include itself. And that's basically what we got to do. We got to rewrite history to include ourselves. And the things that they thought were the most important aspects of history are not the most important aspects of history to us.
And that's what the younger generations really understand.
Yeah,
I
this
think
is a canvas, man. Our community is a canvas, and we can make it beautiful with civic equipment, facilities, with festivals.
community spaces.
Yeah, the stages in Starbucks, the stages in Costco. I mean, we can make it where performers, I think media makers need more venues, and we got to decentralize this whole corporate homogenization of our culture.
Okay.
Beautiful.
You
I
think that's
think
gonna be
that's,
good?
yeah, that's a wonderful note to end this episode on. Thank you guys so much for your time. Once again, I'm Kylie Batlin. Hi, hi,
I'm James
hi.
Burns.
I'm
Yes,
India
yes,
Weeks.
yes.
Yes.
And we'll see you on the next episode of Off Topic. Bye. Shalom.